Welcome. I'm David Graham, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of VerifyYou. Today, we're sitting down with Dr. Alan Finkel, a scientist, entrepreneur, and the former chief scientist of Australia, who spent his career learning and thinking about how technology shapes public interests. The HumanHour, as the audience from last episode knows, is a conversation about what it takes to keep the internet human and the data businesses run on human as well. Alan recently founded Proudly Human, which is very much in line with the theme of our conversation series. And prior to that, he has sold two companies. And as I mentioned previously, serving as the chief scientist of Australia and chairing Monash University as well. He's now focused on a question that's really right at the center of what it is that we're doing at VerifyYou. And Alan has learned a lot about kind of how AI is shaping the world and content and media more broadly throughout his experience of founding Proudly Human. So, Alan, thanks for being here and really excited to dive in with you.
David, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking to the conversation with you. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Same here. Well, I figured we'd dive right in and kind of start a little bit earlier on in your journey and then graduate towards the Proudly Human adventure and where you guys sit currently with that. So the first thing I'm curious about learning about, and I think our audience would appreciate, is earlier on in your career, you started with Silicon Valley biotech and then transitioned into Australian edtech and then into science publishing, public service, and now AI authenticity. So you've kind of done everything that a human could possibly do in the world of business. And so I guess my curiosity is around kind of how did you move from one venture to the next in vastly different fields? And then what's the through line between all of that, if there is one?
David, that's a question that could have a very open-ended answer. But the main thing is that I never had a plan. You know, a lot of young kids are encouraged to think about what they want to do and have a vision for where they want to be. And that makes sense. But for some reason, I didn't have a plan. I thought when I was young that I wanted to be a doctor, but then when I had to go to university, I realized that meant I'd be spending the rest of my life dealing with old people and sick people. And I was more interested in the technology of the body, if you like. So I did engineering as the next thing to do that would satisfy my interest in technology and being creative. But I had no idea where I would take engineering. I didn't even know what type of engineering I would want to do. And the first year we had to make a choice. I chose electronics engineering, and that was a good choice because I loved physics and mathematics, and it really was a way to express all of that. I finished my bachelor's degree, didn't know what I wanted to do, wasn't ready to enter the Air Force, so I walked around the university campus speaking to various senior researchers and eventually decided to do a PhD. And that PhD brought together my interest in medicine and the human body with electronics. I did a PhD in neuroscience. Now, the really interesting thing about the brain is you have about 86 billion active brain cells, electrically active brain cells called neurons. Now, if you've drunk a lot in your life, you might have a few fewer, but if you kept your stock, you'd have about 86 billion. And we used to use the analogy that they were like a telephone exchange, then the internet. The more we learn, the more we understand how complex it is. But at their fundamentals, a neuron is a little bit like a transistor. And when they connect to each other, it's a bit like a microprocessor, and eventually you've got the whole brain. And somewhere from that, you get the emergent phenomenon of consciousness. But I wasn't going that far. I was looking at how the individual neurons work, and I found that I needed really some very, very exquisitely sensitive equipment to do the research, to make the electrical recordings that I had to do. Microvolts, nanoamps, really small currents, small voltages. The philosophy of the electrical engineering department where I was housed was basically, Alan, you can have the best equipment in the world as long as you design and build it yourself. So I did that during my PhD at the same time as I was doing experiments, realized I didn't see a future as a researcher, but I truly enjoyed designing the equipment. Got a break by meeting a famous researcher from the State University of New York, and that made me realize that people like covet thy neighbor. They coveted the equipment that I had been designing. So I went to Silicon Valley, as you said, and I started a company making the equipment that neuroscientists in universities around the world or pharmaceutical companies around the world needed to develop to understanding and to develop their new set of drugs that would help with epilepsy and pain management and all sorts of things like that. So that went well. It kept growing. I kept going for 23 years. Then we got acquired by a Silicon Valley company. I came back to Australia, had no plan. I tried to retire. Spent 6 months sailing and golfing. It was horrible. Couldn't stand it. And then I just got rescued by luck. Somebody who was the scientific head of a significant medical research institute called me up and asked me if I'd like to join the board. And that was at the beginning of my re-engagement at a community level in Australia, because previously for 23 years my focus had been America, and I just followed the flow. From that, I got an opportunity to put my hat in the ring to be considered as the Chancellor or the Chairman of the Board of Australia's biggest university, Monash University. I did that for 8 years, but at the same time, I played around with other things, because when you're Chairman of the Board, it's about 2 days a week. I became the Chief Technology Officer of an electric car charging company, the President of the Australian Academy of Engineering, and then I got a request to effectively spend 5 years as the Chief Scientist of Australia, which is a role, it sounds like Australia's Chief Scientist would have all the scientists in the country reporting to him or her, but it's really an advisory role. It's advising the Prime Minister, the Minister for Industry and Science, other ministers as required on innovation, science and research. And of course I had staff, but not the whole of the scientific establishment of Australia. And it was a hoot. I had never seen that in my destiny. That finished. It was a 5-year contract. The government liked what I was doing. They created a new position called the Special Advisor to the Australian government, which I did for a couple of years. Then I left all of that, wrote a couple of books, but somehow in the meantime I'd managed to found a science magazine and found a education publishing company called Style Education, and kept that going for 13 overlapping years. And we got bought out last year by a large American company called Curriculum Associates, which left me facing another retirement. And I only had one goal in life, which was to fail retirement again, but in a meaningful way. Because one of the things that was really important to me, David, was that my first company, which was called Axon Instruments, we were making the scientific research equipment that enabled researchers to develop understanding of the human nervous system and medical interventions for pain and epilepsy and other neurodegenerative diseases. So it's what I called a for-profit but for good purpose company. And then same with my education company, Style Education, which I founded in 2012 and sold last year. It doesn't get much better purpose than helping to educate the young people. And so it was really just delight the type of people that a company like that attracts as the employees, and the satisfaction we all had from seeing the smiles on the teachers' faces and knowing that the students were learning really were effectively, was just a wonderful experience. So in both cases, they were for profit, but for good purpose. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Proudly Human, which is the way I got myself out of retirement the second time. I'll anticipate the discussion by saying, in a sense, it's for profit and for holy purpose. I've sort of upped the ante, trying to do something about protecting the nature of the human experience.
I love it. Well, I appreciate the background, because I think it's helpful context into why you're doing what you're doing today. And it gives the audience kind of a good picture of the wide range of things you've done over your career. And it kind of sounds like you've lived 3 lifetimes for the average person. So first off, kudos to you and being able to squeeze so much into just one lifetime. And I guess specifically, if we take that kind of last, or one of the last roles that you talked about, being the chief scientist of Australia, and then also kind of like playing in the intersection of policy and then also education with the last company you sold, was there something or many things in both those roles that led you to Proudly Human specifically? And like, if not, what was the catalyst for this specific venture as kind of your current thing that again allowed you to fail retirement for the second or third time, I guess now?
So again, not having a plan, when I look back at any moment, not having a plan, when I look back, it's surprising to see how many little triggers materialised during that time. So, as Chief Scientist of Australia, one of my actual roles was to communicate to the public. And so I gave in 5 years 100 formal speeches, about 500 PowerPoint stand-up type speeches. And when I look back among the formal speeches, there were quite a few that were delivered to openings of a robotics institute or an AI institute, or just being asked to talk about the impact of digital technology on society. And so each time you give a speech, you end up doing a lot of research to back it up. And so I learned little bits about the interaction between digital technology and the emerging fields of AI. Back in 2017, 2018, 2019, it was nothing like the AI that we're talking about now. But the principles of public policy were things that I learned through having to talk to people in preparation for giving the speeches. So that helped frame some of my thinking. The other important thing is that as Chief Scientist of Australia, I was fairly successful in doing major projects, reports for government, and engaging with ministers. The ministers are politicians, and they think differently to you, David, and differently to me. They've got different priorities, but they do need to understand the things around them. And two things that just naturally was part of the way I operated worked very well. One was I was always evidence-based. I never gave the ministers the answers that they wanted. I gave them the correct answers, but clearly explained and respectfully explained. And that worked. It's surprising. People think you have to give people what they're expecting to hear and wanting to hear if you want to survive in a political milieu. And I'm sure in some circumstances you do, but I had the gravitas of being Australia's chief scientist. And if I was showing intellectual respect to a minister or a prime minister by giving them advice that was deeply evidence-based, they took it on board and respected it. The second thing that I think is relevant to everything I do, including Proudly Human, is to follow the engineering method. And this is possibly the best piece of advice anybody listening to this might take away from the podcast. The engineering method is something you don't learn in an engineering degree, or I certainly didn't learn it in an engineering degree, and I come across basically no one who has. It's a 5-step method. And the first step sounds incredibly trite. It's embarrassing. The first step is identify the problem. And the reason why that's the first step is too often people think that they've identified the problem and they rush off and they're solving the wrong problem. Stop, take your time and say, what is the inherent or fundamental problem that deserves my attention and deserves a solution? And then it becomes more logical. The second step is to analyze the problem. The third step is based on the analysis to come up with a solution. The fourth step is to test the solution with customers or in the field. Then you have to pause and iterate between the third and the fourth step. Develop a solution, test, improve the solution, test again, improve again, test again. That's technically called iteration. And the fifth step, it's embarrassing to say because it sounds so obvious, but people forget it all the time. And that's to package the solution up into an actual deliverable outcome. You know, if you're making a gadget, write the instructions as well. If you're making a piece of electronic equipment, give it a really good mechanical enclosure and a user interface that people can use without thinking. That final packaging is important. You know, beauty is on the surface, but it's also deep. I'd say beauty is skin deep. So I've used that process all the time. To go further, if I may, after I'd sort of retired in July of last year, I just had people sending me things, just friends, casually, that were surprising me, like a Google tool, I think it was called Neo, that could make short video clips with animated humans who were indistinguishable from real humans. Gone was the sixth finger. Gone was the awkward gait. Gone was the strange lighting. And then there was Velvet Sundown, which was a group that got 1.5 million downloads in the first 2 weeks, sometime around about July or August on Spotify, before people realized that it was an AI group. It didn't exist. They realized because they liked it. They liked it. And they went
Yeah.
looking for clips of the band on tour, and they couldn't find anything. And that's when they worked out that it was AI. And so it was just an onslaught of things that made me realize that AI has gotten to a point where it's so powerful that it is being used by the people who control it such that it ends up masquerading as human, and the audiences don't know that. And that just seemed wrong, because much of our appreciation of something creative, whether it's music or an image or a film or a piece of art or a piece of tapestry, is think about what motivated the artist, enjoying their expression and their talent and admiring their talent. I mean, really, if I go to an art gallery and I see and these things do exist, a white painting with a red square in the middle that the box says sold for $2 million, I think I wouldn't pay $2,000 or $200 for it because I could do it myself.
Right.
But, when I see an impressionist painting or any painting that really has a lot of invested effort, I'm admiring the talent of the artist, the human artist, as much as I'm admiring the finished piece. And that's why we pay for art, whereas interior decoration of a house is also a talent, but it's a different level of admiration. Everything's a different level of admiration, whether it's a book or music or whatever. And there was just one last thing, if I may. If I said to you that I saw a documentary on the Thunderbirds, what would that indicate to, what would you think of?
Music, probably likely
No,
music.
Thunderbirds, a lot of people think of it as an old television cartoon, but it's actually the name of the US
Okay.
Air Force stunt flying team. And
Mm,
Netflix had a wonderful documentary which I was watching when I was on the exercise machine, because exercise machines are very, very boring, as you would no doubt know. And so if you watch something on TV, it helps a lot. And this was about the pilots. They only select 2 or 3 of the best pilots from the US Air Force every year, who've had 10,000 hours of flying, landing on and off aircraft carriers and all sorts of things. And then they start training them to be stunt flyers, because it is so difficult. They're flying at, 300 miles an hour with their wingtips 12 inches apart. It's incredibly dangerous. So this documentary was about them, but showing their performances. And I've been to occasionally, not often, to events that had stunt flying. And I recall you always looking up, and partly you're overwhelmed by the magnificence of what they're doing, but your heart's in your mouth because you're terrified that if something goes wrong, they'll crash and burn and people will die. And it is seriously dangerous. The Thunderbirds have had about 300 of these elite pilots in a 50-year period, 55-year period, and 28 have died. And I'm not talking about
wow.
dying in bed. I'm talking about dying in training accidents or in performances.
Wow.
So the concentration, the training, we are right to admire them. Now, if I went to a show and that same exact flying display took place, but it was autonomous aeroplanes with AI in the control, I wouldn't even watch. It would have no
Right.
thrill.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be admiring, I'm not going to sit there admiring the magnificence of the accuracy of the autonomous pilot in a way that I would, admire the magnificence and accuracy of the human pilot. It's just different, and rightly so.
Totally. Right. That yeah, and the margin for the error is not really there either, right? It's like you have the human error element which, as you said, keeps kind of your adrenaline up, keeps you on the edge of your seat. And then when you know it's fully autonomous, everything's been calculated, everything's driven by data, and there's just not as much margin for error.
It's not exciting. There's nothing to admire. So I began to realize that there was a problem. There are many problems with AI. There are many benefits of AI, but the problem that I focused on was AI being used in the creative arts without disclosure. So what's the solution? The obvious solution is every time AI is used to make an image or a film or music, it should be disclosed. It should be clearly labeled. Well, who can do that? Governments. But they're asleep at the wheel.
Right.
Governments, firstly, find it too difficult to regulate anything in AI, even if they tried, because it is developing so quickly. And regulations typically take years and years and years to develop. But it's not only that the AI is developing too quickly, the volume is huge. Like 40 million images, probably since you got up this morning, AI images have been uploaded today. And so it's hopeless. It's rare that you see labeled AI content. So we've got the problem is that people aren't informed. If they're informed, they can choose. But if they're not informed, they can't choose. So the problem is clear.
Right.
The analysis is it's a lack of labeling. The first part of the solution, the obvious solution, is governments should step in and force the labeling. But that's not working. So is there another solution? And the answer is yes when you think about it, and that is to flip the problem on its head. And instead of forcing the disclosure of AI, verify and then mark with a trust mark or a certification mark the human authorship of the creative art, of the creative material. And there's a lot more to the story, but that became the essential starting point of Proudly Human. So you have a problem, you have an analysis. We have two solutions. The obvious solution, it's not up to citizens or companies, it's up to governments, and they're not doing it. The alternative solution is to celebrate the human origin rather than label the AI origin.
I love it, Alan. And I think such an important distinction about what you're doing, and actually two comments. Number one is there's actually a very similar approach to what we're doing at VerifyYou. And the reason why it's similar is because we took the approach of rather than trying to passively find the AI or label the AI actor in whatever platform it is, that's a constant cat and mouse game, and AI is only going to get better. And so we felt we were going to be a total cat chasing its tail in that arena. And there's so many companies that do that. And so our approach was let's flip it on its head and proactively verify the human and give them that mark for them to showcase worldwide and any platform they're operating on. And you took a very similar approach of, hey, instead of trying to play that cat and mouse game of verifying which content is human, which content is AI, you're like, no, let's flip it on its head. Let's proactively verify that this is human made content and let the AI content sit. But the AI content won't have a mark that it is, in fact, proudly human. And so I think that's such an important distinction because it's very practical, right? Like if you were to play the game of looking at an image and then trying to mark it as human or AI, it'd be a constant waste of dollars, waste of energy, waste of effort. Whereas you're just saying, no, let's go out and seek the people who care about marking their content as human and understand the value behind it. And then the consumers in the market will assign the value that it will assign to that, which we assume will be a greater value. So I think that's just so important. And I really like the approach that you all took to that problem. Instead of trying to kind of look at content and then retroactively figure out which is which.
David, I agree with you and I admire what you've done. We've looked at different problems, but they're related problems. The human authenticity problem, the fact that you can verify that someone is human when they join an online game or an online dating site or whatever it is really important to the other people, the humans that are on that site.
Yep.
And the tech bros, as they're often called, the social media companies, they don't care. They want to force commerce. They want to take advantage of all the interactions that are occurring. They encourage, to some extent, the impersonation by AI of humans.
Totally. And the other thing I want to call it too is that I think you're a lot of people would look on the surface at a company like yours and think that you're anti-AI. But in fact, you're actually not at all, because you're not trying to hinder the progress of AI in any way, shape, or form. What you're doing is just creating that distinction, allowing AI to continue to race forward and still allow people to use it, even encourage the use of it, but assign that value and assign that demarcation to human generated content. And I think that's so important in our world today, because you have a lot of, and again, back to the government point, you have the financial markets, just the market more broadly, that obviously is incentivized to continue to make progress with AI, push it to the absolute limit. And then you have governments kind of torn between, they want it to be pushed to the limit for the betterment of this, of the overall government and this, the nation that is behind it. But then they also want to regulate it because they don't want to hurt the consumer. They don't want to hurt businesses more broadly. So I think like the approach that you all have taken of, you're not trying to hinder AI in any way or say that AI is a bad thing and the use of AI in content generation is a bad thing. You're saying you're just trying to create that distinction and letting the consumer assign their own value as they may.
That's right, and I think you're in the same position. The way we type, the succinct way we try to phrase that is, we're pro-human, we're not anti-AI. And
Yep.
if people interpret that differently, that's up to them. But we spend no time trying to prevent or block or dissuade people from using AI, other than in discussions I would have about the use of AI, I think, inappropriately to substitute for their own creativity. Look, David, as you know, AI is everywhere already, and the rate of development is staggering. You know that if you look over the last 6 years, AI capability has been measured as increasing by twofold, doubling every 7 months. And doubling it every 7 months turns out to be tenfold every 2 years, which means if you look at the capability of AI today, 2026, mid-year, it'll be 10 times higher capability in 2028, then times 10. 6 years from now in 2032, it'll be 1,000 times more powerful. Now, that's if it stays at the same rate, but it might go faster because they're getting towards this so-called regenerative development, or otherwise called the singularity, where AI is writing the next generation of AI. It's not quite there yet, but it's getting closer and closer. So AI is absolutely everywhere. And to push back and say, no, it shouldn't be used in bureaucracy or the legal system or banking would be pointless. But I think
Right.
as humans, we have the right to say, no, it should not be used in the creative industries. That is something that is deeply human. Part of our human interaction is exchanging ideas, exchanging creative outputs. AI should not take that away from us. And if governments aren't going to protect us, then we need to almost have a citizens' revolution. I think of your company, VerifyYou, and my company, Proudly Human, as part of that broader revolution that says, no, there are certain things that are too important to the nature of being human, to human society, to allow it to be surreptitiously taken over by AI.
Yeah. I'm totally with you. And I guess to kind of the future and what success looks like for Proudly Human. And you founded in 2025, and so you're early on, but kind of have made some great progress so far. What would you say is the status of Proudly Human today, and what you would want the audience to know about it? And then what does success look like 3, 10, 15 years down the road for Proudly Human? And then also like a little bit of how you get there. And like I think something that you marked earlier in the conversation that is so important to your company is it really has to be a cultural movement from the people. It's not necessarily something that you're going to go and sell into businesses and expect the businesses to widely adopt right from the get-go. It really has to be forced by the people who have been impacted by it, and also the people that, as we're talking about today, would choose human if they had the option and actually could see those two options side by side.
A lot of questions in there. You started with, what does success look like? Our plan is for the label Proudly Human, or trust mark, certification mark, our logo, our label, our name, to be globally recognized. So part of our approach to do that is to say that we use Proudly Human for certifying the human creative content, irrespective of the creative industry. So whether it's book writing or painting, it's still a proudly human certification. We don't use human authored or human painted because then you'd lose the brand recognition. So we're trying to use it for all creative outputs and in all countries. So it will take time, obviously, but it's important because without the brand recognition, there's not a lot of incentive for the human creator to apply for, take the time and effort to apply for a proudly human certification mark. What they really want is that consumers, audiences will come to them and buy their books, buy their paintings, buy their tapestries, buy their articles, preferentially because they know that they were human authored. If they're going to spend the money anyway to buy a book, look at this list of books that are marked, just like the moment you get star ratings when you do a listing of best books. Wouldn't it be great if, in addition to the star rating, you got a little tick mark that said it was guaranteed to be human authored? So we do need the brand recognition. So it's a very important part of what success looks like. And the how is just by getting the word out and focusing on the intention, the good intention, and the naming, the good intention of proudly human and the actual phrase proudly human across all industries. So we need to do that in any sensible way that we can. Another thing you asked is, or we were talking about the people. The people have to actually make it clear. People should be seeing this almost as existential, not to the human race, but existential to the joy of being human. I mean, if the Armageddon type or dystopian outcomes are realized where all the new jobs that are created go to AI so that there's very little employment, if all the creativity goes to AI so you don't have the recreation in AI, you've massively limited the things that we as humans enjoy doing. Yes, there'll be things less. I mean, in person, I could see that if that happens, there'll be a lot more attendance at live music and live sporting events and live performances of all kind. And you've seen that in chess. I mean, IBM developed a chess computer, I can't remember, maybe 15 years ago, that was already capable of beating the best grandmaster. But chess competitions are still vibrant, but they do them in person.
Right.
So it's not as if we can't, life is lost and it's all gloom and despair, but the options that we enjoy today will be severely restricted. And we don't deserve that. We deserve to have more and more options unfolding as society gets wealthier and better and served by technology. What we're at risk of is the technology is not serving our needs, it's dominating our needs and serving the tech companies that are using algorithms and AI to push us into different pathways that we wouldn't ordinarily pursue, or to restrict us from the things that we would pursue. So it's not as if Proudly Human is going to save the human race, but we can contribute alongside VerifyYou, alongside like-minded companies and associations. We can contribute to preserving the richness of being human.
Totally. I love the way you put that. And I think something that really sits with me with your brand overall is the name itself. It's just very deliberate. It's individuals should take pride in the fact that they are human and the stuff that they generate is human. And so what we're trying to do at VerifyYou is really celebrate the human and give them benefit for being human online. And what you're doing is celebrating the fact that they've created something on their own, independent of AI assistance or just pure AI creation front to back. And I think in both of those, the through line is you should be prideful of the fact that you are human and that you are doing things that are human only, or kind of, as you put it earlier, require years and years of skill to then output eventually at some point in time that people will value. And our thesis, which is quite aligned with yours, is that over time, there'll be a premium placed on individuals that have verified themselves as human, data that has been verified as human. And then your thesis is output, whether it's content, and we talked about all the different forms of output, but a lot of creative output for your brand. People will place a premium on that type of output over output that maybe isn't marked as human. So I just think it's so important for where we're headed. And I think the overall market sentiment is aligned with what we're both building, and they will place that premium, and they actually already are on that type of
Yeah,
content.
David, I share your analysis and your ambition and your hopes. We're both addressing the same high level problem through Verify You and Proudly Human, and we've picked a significant subsector of that high level problem. And interestingly, I don't think
Right.
Verify You and Proudly Human so much overlap as touch, and therefore we're covering a pretty broad fraction of the overall problem. But there needs to be uptake by consumers. There needs to be awareness by consumers. So we need to work to help people anticipate where things are going so they start investing now in doing what they can
Right.
to commit to human creativity, or in your case, the human authenticity of a participant in a conversation or whatever it is that's going on in the internet, or data, etc. It's really important. I mean, we're talking here about an assault on the essence of being human.
Yeah, totally. And would you say that just from your kind of interactions with, let's just call them creators more broadly, whether they're creating music, books, paintings, etc., what would you say the sentiment is overall across those creators is currently, and how have they been impacted by the introduction of AI, and how does that kind of speak to what you all are doing?
I'd say that pretty much everybody we speak to is deeply concerned and wants to do something. The biggest problem we find with, in particular with book authors, is they're hostile now to any kind of technology in their sector because their copyright has been effectively stolen by the AI training algorithms that have scooped up either legal or illegal copies in many cases of their books. And they actually feel uncomfortable because part of our process is a technological verification. We're not anti-AI. So if you come to Proudly Human and you want to get your book verified and certified, you've got to prove you're human. You've got to read what we regard as, we call it de minimis standards. AI can be used in writing a book for research, for maybe even editorial discussion, for spell check and grammar check, for formatting the table of contents of the bibliography, but it can't be used to write your sentences. But as soon as it starts writing sentences, it writes paragraphs, and then it's written the chapter and it's written the book, and you've lost the authenticity of what you're doing. But people often, even if they sign a declaration that they've done it, they're self-certifying, they really haven't stayed within those boundaries because their tolerance for being supported by AI expands as AI does more and more. So we have to verify the book by putting it through technological tools. We use AI-powered detectors of AI. It's warfare, AI versus AI. We use a suite of AI detectors and our own averaging algorithms before we agree that the book was human authored or not human authored. Well, we can't do that if they don't upload the book. And they're scared
Right.
to upload the book, even though we are absolutely committed to the privacy of their upload. We only use it for the purpose of verification. We don't mine it. We don't read it. We don't share it with anybody else. But they're just scared of anything other than working with their publisher nowadays because of what's happened. So that's one of the biggest challenges, is to get the authors to the point that they recognize the need to have a human authored verification mark of some kind. Proudly Human, of course, is the ideal one. They recognize the need, and they have the comfort in the reputation of the certification company to upload their book for certification.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And to all of your creators out there that you're having these conversations with, my remark would be, it's better to kind of go out and proactively get this mark, and the worry of your copy kind of getting out there prior to the public release. The problem with the public release is once it's publicly out there, all the LLMs are going to scrape it anyways. And so if you can go out and get this mark prior to the release, then at least you can certify the fact that, like, hey, this was written by a human, and I went out and did the certification ahead of time. And then kind of the LLMs, once it's out there, they have that problem anyway. So that makes a lot of sense in kind of terms of the creator's eyes. But I think your kind of point back to them is very valid. All right. Well, I think as we kind of wrap here, a closing question that goes a little bit more macro about your career overall, Alan, that I think the audience would appreciate is if you were to speak to all the different builders and creators out there, not just entrepreneurs in the sense of building a traditional business, but even just the builders that are doing paintings, artists, et cetera, every form of somebody that is putting something out there into the world from 0 to 1. You've done that quite a few times over your career, and now we're doing it again. What would your biggest piece of advice be to those individuals, kind of looking back on like 20-year-old Alan way back when, and what are some things you wish you would have known?
So I probably wouldn't change anything in my career trajectory. The advice that was never spoken to me, and I didn't even articulate to myself, but I always followed, is whatever you're doing, do it really well. And that will bring you and your products to the attention of other people. Doors of opportunity will open, and then be brave enough to step through the doors of opportunity.
I love it. Well, that's a good closing thought. And I think that's very inspiring to anyone out there that is scared to take that first step. I mean, here's somebody in you that is taking that first step over and over again. And there's a lot of, in all the success that we covered with your background, I'm sure there's a lot of missteps and a lot of failures in between. And that's the only way you got to that next thing. And so I think that's a good closing remark for the world out there listening.
I guess the corollary to my advice based on what you were saying is don't dwell on the missteps.
Exactly right. I love it. Well, yeah, I think I guess the last thought would be, where can the audience find you? Where can they find Proudly Human, and how can they best interact with not just you, but also the company overall?
So we've got two really important websites. If you just look for Proudly Human, you'll probably end up at proudlyhuman.org, which is where we do all the verification, certification of creative arts and music and books. But we've got a new one which we've just launched called proudlyhuman.jobs, which is addressing yet another problem in the recruitment sector, where people are using AI to write their cover letters, and companies are trying to recruit people for their talent, not for what the AI expresses about them. So through proudlyhuman.jobs, if you were writing a letter, David, you've got your own company. I hope you're not applying for a job. But if you were applying for a job and you'd written a cover letter, you can upload your cover letter to us and we will certify it and give you a QR code and a link that you can put on your cover letter. And the recruiter can just scan that and be told that your cover letter has been verified to have been written by a human. That gives enormous comfort to the prospective employer. So just look for proudlyhuman.jobs or proudlyhuman.org.
I love it. And actually, to take that a step further, something that we see all the time too is the cover letter is one thing, the resume is another thing, but then what we've done to try to weed out some of the AI applications, and we just hired 2 more engineers, and we got hundreds of applications for each role. And the reason why is because it's the cost to applying is so low now because it's so easy to generate that application. And so the friction we added was just more questions to, why are you applying for this role? Why did you choose VerifyYou? But still, it's very easy to do all those things. And so I actually think, like, to take it even a step further, we would love something where we can say, okay, our entire application from front to back, cover letter, resume, but then also the questions in between, were actually thoughtfully crafted by a human, as opposed to them just putting it into ChatGPT or Claude and then generating a response for us.
David, we should talk.
Let's do it. Well, I really appreciate it, Alan. This has been an incredible episode. I think that the audience is really going to value it. And yeah, see you next time on the HumanHour.
David, my absolute pleasure.
The cost to applying is so low now because it's so easy to generate that application. And so the friction we added was just more questions to, why are you applying for this role? Why did you choose VerifyYou? But still, it's very easy to do all those things. And so I actually think, like, to take it even a step further, we would love something where we can say, okay, our entire application from front to back, cover letter, resume, but then also the questions in between, were actually thoughtfully crafted by a human, as opposed to them just putting it into ChatGPT or Claude and then generating a response for us.
David, we should talk.
Let's do it. Well, I really appreciate it, Alan. And this has been an incredible episode. I think that the audience is really going to value it. And yeah, see you next time on the Human Hour.
David, my absolute pleasure.